Hey, thanks for checking out this video. We're going to go over the fundamentals of JavaScript. If you're just starting or even thinking about starting a career in web development, you're in the right place. I upload new videos every week. Hit subscribe and the bell to get notified. And stick around to the end for some extras. We're going to create a basic to-do list. So what is JavaScript? The short answer is it does things. It makes your website or app interactive. And it's the fastest growing and most popular programming language according to Stack Overflow. It's the programming language of the web. All browsers use JavaScript, and it can even be used on the back end at the server with Node.js. It can update and change both HTML and CSS. You can manipulate, calculate, and validate data. It's very fast and versatile. Not only can you use it on the web, but also in mobile applications with something like React Native, and you can also create desktop applications with Electron. Now there are different versions of JavaScript. There's ES5 and ES6. Now the most recent widely supported version is ES6. I'll be referencing some differences between ES5 and ES6 as we go. Another thing is frameworks. There are different JavaScript frameworks, but in this video we'll only be covering plain vanilla JavaScript. It's really what you should start with. Lastly, something that a lot of times beginners get confused with is Java and JavaScript. So Java is not JavaScript. They are completely different programming languages. Alright, now let me give you a quick demo of what JavaScript can do. Now with just HTML and CSS, you can only have a static page. It really can't do anything. But with JavaScript, we can do something like this. So we have a basic to-do list and we can add a task. And we can add another task. And then once we've completed a task, we can check it off. And we can clear the completed tasks. Hopefully I can check this one off soon. There are a few prerequisites before learning JavaScript. You should at least have a basic understanding of HTML and CSS. I have videos on those subjects as well if you need to start there. As far as software, you're going to need a browser, and I recommend Chrome. And you're also going to need a code editor, and for that I recommend Visual Studio Code. If you're unfamiliar with VS Code, I have a video on that as well. I'll put links in the description below for my other videos. Let's see some code now. So I've got Chrome open here. We can actually write JavaScript directly into Chrome. There are the Chrome developer tools, and if you press F12, it'll bring those up. And then just make sure that you're on the console tab. And then here we can actually write JavaScript. So I can write console.log, and then we could say hello world. And I'll explain later on what console log is, but basically this is a way for us to debug our script and see variables and other items of data as we go. So if I hit enter here, you'll see that it says hello world. We can also do math in here, so I could do 1 plus 1, and it says 2. Another thing we could do is alert, and we could do the same thing, hello world. And what that does is it actually presents a pop-up, and it says hello world, and we have to hit OK. And we can clear the console by pressing Ctrl L, or you can type clear. Alright, now I've got VS Code open here, and I'm running the extension live server so that we can see all of the updates in real time. I've just got a basic HTML shell here. And first, let's talk about where to place the JavaScript. So there are different ways, and not all of them are great options, but I am going to cover all of them so that you know. So I'm going to add a button here, and we'll just say click me. And then in the button, we can use a property called onClick. And within this onClick, we can write JavaScript. So I could say alert success. Now if I save that, you'll see the button here on our website, and if I click it, you'll see the alert pops up, success. So writing JavaScript within your HTML markup is not recommended. I can't think of a single reason why you would ever do this, but it's possible, you can, but just please don't. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to get rid of this. Now our other option is within the head. We can add a script tag. And then within the script tag, we can write JavaScript. So I can do the same thing there, and I can save that. And immediately, when the page is loaded, this JavaScript runs. And we see the alert, success, and we have to hit OK. So notice here that you don't see the button on the web page, and the page is still loading. When the browser reads the HTML document, it goes from top to bottom. And so the first thing it sees here is the script, and it runs the alert. The alert requires the user to hit OK before it continues. So it's stuck right here, and it hasn't processed the rest of the file yet. So we actually have to hit OK, and then it goes through the rest of the file, and now we see the button load. So the script in the head is not ideal either. There will be some instances where you will need to put script in the head, but for the most part, the best practice is to put the script at the bottom of the body. So after all of your HTML, but within the body, we'll put our script. And I really don't like to use alerts. Normally what we'll use is a console log. So console log success. And then let me open up the console, F12. And now if I save this, you'll see it loads the page and you see success. Now it is best practice to put our script at the bottom of the body, but it's still not ideal to write the actual JavaScript within the HTML file. Now this is something called separation of concerns. We actually want to put our JavaScript in an external file. Just like we want to keep our CSS styles separate from our HTML, we also want to keep our JavaScript separate. So what we'll do here is I will cut this out, and we're going to include a script tag with a source attribute. And that's going to be main.js. And I already have that created. It's right up here. And so I'll paste in this console log directly into this main.js. We don't need script tags or anything like that. We just type our JavaScript into this file. And so I'll save these. And you'll see the same thing happens. We still get the success console log. All right, I'm going to get rid of this button. We don't need that. So let's talk about commenting. So there is a way for developers to add comments to their script to describe what different parts of the script are for. So we can add a comment by using double forward slashes, and then anything that we type after that on this line will be commented out. The browser will not process it. So that is a single line comment. We can also add multi-line comments by using /*, and then we could say multi-line comment, and then we can close that with a */. So now everything in between the /* and the */ is all commented out. Alright, so now let's talk about variables. So variables are used to store data temporarily in memory. It's a way for us to keep track of things. So in ES5, we used to declare variables with var. So we could say var color equals red, and that would work. And we could say console log color, and if I save that, we'll now see in the console log it says red. But in ES6 they added an alternate, and it's called let. So we could say let age equal 30, and then we will console log age and save that, and now you'll see in the console it says 30. Now there are some issues with var, and later on I'll go through why we don't use var anymore, but just know that from now on throughout the video I will use let. Let is reassignable, so we could actually just declare let. So just let age, we're declaring a variable, but we haven't assigned anything to it. So then we could say age equals 30, and we'll see the console log still says 30. But later on in our script, we could assign a new value to it. So we could say age equals 40. And so now JavaScript goes from top to bottom, and so we declared age, and then we set the age to 30, and then we set the age to 40, and then we console logged age. So it's going to take the current value of age and put it onto the console. Let's go over a few rules to variables. So variables are case sensitive. They also should be meaningful and descriptive. And they cannot start with a number. They cannot contain a space or a hyphen. And they cannot be a reserved word. So we can't say let equal something. We can't say that, and that would give us an error if we tried to log let. So you don't have to memorize all of the reserved words, but just understand that you can't use a reserved word as a variable name. So I'll change this back. Now, since we can't use spaces or hyphens, the best practice when naming your variables is called camel case. So if we have multiple words, we could write it like this. So proper camel case. True. So we start with lowercase, and then each word after that begins with an uppercase. And we can actually declare multiple variables on a single line. So we could say let A, comma, B, comma, C. So here we declare A, B, and C, but we haven't assigned anything to them. So we could assign A equals 1, B equals 2, and C equals 3. And that would work just fine. We can also declare and assign them at the same time as well in the same line. So A equals 1, B equals 2, and C equals 3. So while you can do this, the modern best practice is to go ahead and put everything on its own line. You don't have to, but I think it reads easier. So like that. Now we didn't talk about these semicolons at the end. So in JavaScript, to terminate a line, you would use a semicolon. There are times when you're required to use a semicolon, and there are times when you're not required to use a semicolon. In my opinion, the best practice is to go ahead and use a semicolon to terminate every line. Alright, now let's talk about constants. Now constant is similar to var or let. So we could say const pi equals 3.14. So a constant is read-only. It's not reassignable. So in this instance, we have pi equals 3.14. So pi is never anything besides 3.14. So we don't want that to ever change in our code. So constant is a way of preventing bugs and preventing data from changing accidentally. So now if we console log pi, and we see 3.14 in the console. Now if we try to reassign it, let's say pi equals 5 and save that, you'll see we get an error. We can't reassign a constant. Once it's set, that's it. We also cannot just declare and then assign the value later. So we can't do this, const pi and then pi equals 3.14. See here that we get an error that we're missing the initializer. So we have to declare and initialize by assigning on a constant. So another best practice is to just use constant every time unless you know that a variable needs to be reassigned at a later time in the code. Alright, so now let's talk about data types. So there are primitive data types and reference data types. So we'll start with the primitive, and the first one is strings. So we could say let name equal John. And the fancy title for this is string literal. And then we have numbers. So let age equal 30. So that is a number literal. And then we have a Boolean, which is true or false. So we could say loves cats equals true. And that is a Boolean literal. And then we have null. So we could say let color equal null. So if we want the color variable to begin with an empty or null value, we could assign that. And then we have undefined. So if we just say let list equal undefined, you can assign it this way, but if we just took this off, it would be the same as writing it like this. So let list, that's going to equal undefined as well. And I can show you that in the console. In the console it says undefined. Now let's see what we can do with some of these. So let's start with the strings. And so we've got name defined as John. I could reassign that, and I could say name equals Mary. And then let's console log name. And actually I'm going to console log it twice so that we can see what it began with and then what it changed to. Now I'll save that, and you'll see on line 7 it console logs John, and then on line 11 it logs Mary. Now if we wanted to add something to John, let's add his last name. So we could say name equals name plus, and then we could say Smith. And then I'm going to get rid of this console, and if I save that, you'll see John Smith. It's all put together though. So we would actually want to add a space here, and now that added his last name. Now another way to write this, we could actually take all of this out here, and we could say name plus equals. So it's going to take the initial value here, name, and then it's going to add to Smith. If we only had equals, then it would change it to Smith, but the plus equals adds Smith to the end. So we'll save that, and now you see the same thing in the console. We could combine strings, which is called concatenation. So we can concatenate two strings. So we'll add another variable here. We'll say let message equal, and we'll say name. So that's going to say John, and then we're going to add to that quotation marks, space is, space, plus, and then we'll put age. And we can get rid of that, and then we will console log the message. So there, now it says John is 30. So let's talk about the quotation marks quickly. So you can actually use double or single quotation marks. It's really the preference of the developer. I think more commonly used is single quotation marks, but we could use double quotation marks here if we wanted. And that will work just the same way. Now the issue comes in is if you want quotation marks within your string. So if I wanted quotation marks around is, that's not going to work, because the beginning quotation mark is here, and then it sees the next one as an ending quotation mark, and so it thinks that is a variable. So if we wanted to use quotation marks on the outside and on the inside of the string, we would have to use an escape character. In JavaScript, that is a backslash. So we could put backslashes on these quotation marks, and then JavaScript will see them properly. And so if I save that, we'll see John is, with quotation marks, 30. But instead of doing this, we could take these off and then just use single quotation marks around the outside of the string. And that will accomplish the same thing. Now if we wanted to use single quotation marks and double quotation marks within a string, we'll either have to escape them with the backslash, or we could actually use backticks. And so that will work just fine as well. So if I save that, let's see what that looks like. So now within the backticks, we have our plus, our single quotation marks, our double quotation marks. It shows everything in between the backticks. And this is actually called a template literal. If you have variables involved, it's easier to use backticks, because we can take all of this out. We can take all of these quotation marks out and the plus signs, and then on these variables, we declare the variables by using a $sign and curly braces around the variables. Alright, now let me save that, and you'll see John is 30. So this is the more modern way of concatenating. Alright, now let's look at numbers and a little bit of math. So I'll remove that, and then we'll use that age variable, and we'll say age equals age plus 5, and then we'll log age, and then that adds it up. So we have addition, we can subtract, we can multiply with the asterisk, and we can divide with a /. So we have all of our math functions there. And then an easier way of doing this, the same as the strings, instead of doing age equals age divided by 5, we could just say age divide equal 5. So that's going to divide 30 by 5. And let me save that. And we get 6. For multiplication, it's the same thing. So multiply equals, and we get 150. Same with plus and minus. Okay, so those were primitive data types, and now let's talk about reference types. So the first one we'll talk about is array literals. So an array is a variable that holds multiple values. It's a data structure with a list of items. So we could say const numbers equal, and we could declare it by saying new array, and then we could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we can console log the numbers. That is not supposed to be a capital. Alright, and so now in the console we see an array here. It says that there are 6 items, and if we expand that, we can see item 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now these numbers on the side, these are indexes. So in JavaScript and in many programming languages, indexes start with 0. So the first item is 0, and then 1, 2, 3, and so on. So if we only wanted to get 3, we would use the index of 2. So we can use bracket notation to only get the third variable. So we'd use open and close brackets, and then within there we would use the index. So it would be index of 2. And now we're only going to get the number 3. Now, I know that might be confusing at first. Just remember that the first variable always starts with an index of 0. Right? So now if we wanted to change one of these variables, we could say numbers, and then we'll use bracket notation. We want to change that number 3 to equal 9. And then let's just console log the entire array again. Now you'll see in our array 1, 2, 9, 4, 5, 6. So we changed the second index, which is 0, 1, 2, right here, second index, from 3 to 9. Now notice that we made this change on a constant. So we said earlier that constants cannot be reassigned. Well, we're not reassigning anything. We're mutating the array. So we can make changes within the array, but we can't reassign the array entirely. So we can't say numbers equals and then a new array. So let me also show you a better way of writing this. So instead of saying numbers equals new array, we can actually just get rid of all of this, and arrays start with brackets. So we'll put brackets on either side there, and I'll save that, and you'll see we get the same thing. So this is the more modern way, easier way, it's shorter. Now let's change this to a different array. We're going to say colors, and we'll say this is equal to a bunch of strings. So we'll say red, blue, green, and yellow. And then if we log that, we'll see our array. We can add items to an array. So we know that we have 4 items, so that'll be index 0, 1, 2, and 3. So we could add an item by saying colors index 4 equals black. And now you'll see that we have an array with red, blue, green, yellow, and black. Now arrays have methods and properties. So right here on colors, if I hit dot, we'll see a bunch of methods and properties here. So one of these properties is length. So we could say colors.length, and if I save that, it will say 5. So that tells us how many items are within the array. Now let's look at a method. I'm going to remove that, and then let's add another color, and we're going to use a method to do this. We'll say colors.push. So push is a method, and methods require parentheses. Within the parentheses, we will push whatever item we want to push into it. It could be anything. It could be a number, a value, a boolean, any of the primitive data types. So we'll push another color, and we'll say white. And then we'll log that, and now you see we have red, blue, green, yellow, black, and white. There are many other methods that you can use. If we wanted to remove the last item from the array, we could use pop, and we don't have to put anything within the parentheses there. If I save that, you'll see that now white, the last item there, is gone. And we could actually assign that last item to another variable. So we could say let last color equal colors.pop, and then let's log last color. And there we see white. So this removed the last item from the array, and it assigned it to this new variable. And we can do the same thing. Instead of the last item, we can do the first item. And to do that, we use shift. So shift removes the first item. So let's rename this first color, and we'll save that. And now we'll see red. And if we console log colors as well, you'll see it pulled the first color out, and it's no longer in the array. All right, now another thing that we can do is we can find the index of a specific value if we know it. So let's get rid of these items, and let's say colors index of, and this is a method, so then we will pass the value that we're looking for. And let's say yellow. Now when I save that, you'll see 3. So yellow is 0, 1, 2, 3, index 3. Now within an array, we can have multiple data types. Let's just name this my array, and we'll have a string, and then we'll have a value, and we can have a boolean, and we could have a null, and then if we log my array, we'll see the array here. So index 0 is red, 1 is 4, 2 is true, and 3 is null. And the total length is 4. Something that we can also have within an array is another array. So let's see what that looks like. So now we have 5 items. The last item is an array with 3 items within it. So we can expand that. And then we see the array here at the end. And within that array, 1, 2, and 3. So you can nest as many arrays within other arrays as you'd like. Now to access these starts to become a little tricky, but this is how you can do it with bracket notation. We could say my array with an index of 0, that's going to equal red. 1 would be 4, 2 would be true, 3 would be null, and let's see what 4 would be. That would be the array. So now within the array, we have 3 indexes. So to access the items within the array, we would add another bracket notation. And we could say 0 for the first index, 1 or 2. And we see the index number 2 is the third item. Alright, now let's talk about the next reference type, which is object literals. So an object contains key value pairs and puts values together. So to demonstrate that, let's create a few values. So let first name equal John, and then last name equals Smith, and then age equal 30. So we can declare these variables like this. Or we could put them inside of an object. Since they are all related, we could combine them to keep them together. So we could say const person equals, and then an object starts with curly braces. And then within here we have our key value pairs. So our key would be first name, and then we have a colon, and then our value is John. And we separate these with a comma. So the next one would be last name, and that's Smith. and then age is 30. So this contains the same information as this. So we can get rid of these, and then let's see how we can access this. So first let's console log person. And we see we get an object here, and if we expand it, we see instead of indexes we have our keys. So the key of age and the value of 30, the key of first name John and last name Smith. So there's a couple of ways to access the values from within the array. The first one that we'll cover is called dot notation. And so on the person, we could say person dot first name. And then if I save that, we'll see that we just see the first name, which is John. And if I hit dot again, you'll see the different values here. We've got age, first name, and last name. So if we use age, we'll get 30. So that's dot notation. The next way is through bracket notation. And so now we could use brackets, and then within the brackets we can specify the key that we're looking for. And so we could say, see they pop up here, age, first name, and last name. So let's do last name. So now our first console log is the age, and our second console log is the last name. Again, this kind of comes back to personal preference, but for the most part, I think most people use dot notation whenever possible. If for some reason we don't know the key ahead of time and we're not sure what the key is going to be, then we could actually use a variable. So let me demonstrate that. So let's create a variable here, let key equal, and we'll say first name. And then in the brackets here, instead of putting last name in quotation marks, we can just put key. And so now the key could be variable. So I'll save that, and now we'll see that the second console log is the first name, which is what is in the key. Within an object, we can have multiple data types as well, just like in arrays. So we can have a key called pets, and then that could be an array, dogs and cats. And then we could also have a key of address, and then the address would be an object. So we can have an object nested within an object. And this would be street, and we could just say 123 street, and the city, we'll say Houston, and the state is Texas. Now to access these different data types, we could use combinations of dot notation and bracket notation. So let's take these out of here, and let's see how can we get the pets. So we could do person.pets, and that will show us our array, dog and cats. Now since pets is an array, we could use bracket notation on that and say we just want the first item from pets, and that'll say dogs. And then for the address, we could do something similar. We could say dot address, and that will give us our object. But within the object, if we just want the state, we could do dot state, and that just gives us Texas. And if we wanted to, we could use bracket notation as well. Now something that we could do is, once the object is created, we could add items to the object, and that's pretty simple. We could say person.email equals john@email.com, and you notice that we don't have a key of email in the object, but we're defining it here. Person.email should equal john@email.com. So now let's log the person object. We'll save that and let's expand it. And so now you see that we have an email key with the email. So we could console log person.email, and it will give us just his email. We could also delete keys. So we could say delete person.age, and then let's just log the person object. And let's look at our array now. And now age is missing. We removed it. Okay, so now we could do something called deconstructing. So if there's only certain values that we're looking to get out of the object, we can pull those out. So we can create a constant, start with curly braces, and within the curly braces we can pull the keys that we're looking for. So if we just want the name, the first and last name, we could say first name, comma, last name, and then set that equal to person. So we're not creating variables or constants here, really. We're pulling those out of person. So think of this as pulling these out. We're pulling these out of person. And so to log this, we would just log first name. And then in console log, if you want to log multiple values, you can just put a comma there and then log the next value. All right, I'll save that. Oops, misspelling there. There we go. Now we have John Smith. And so if we wanted to, let's say we wanted to get the city. So the city is in the address. So we'll need to do address and then city, like that. And now we didn't pull the address out, we just pulled the city. So I could type city here and we'll get Houston. So this is an object of a person, but we could have an array of objects. So this is one person, but there could be multiple people within our data. So this could be an array of people, and arrays start with brackets. So we have this people array, and we have an object of this person. And so if we wanted to add another person, I could copy this down, Alt-Shift down arrow, duplicates it. And now we have a second object, and we just need to separate these objects with a comma. And so now this could be Mary Smith. And we could have as many as we want within this array. All right, so now this is very similar to JSON. And when you're working with APIs and backend servers, most of the time the data that you're going to receive is going to be in the JSON format. So it'll be very similar to this and very easy to parse and to manipulate. And if you don't know what JSON is, I have a video for that. I'll put a link in the description below. So what we could actually do with this array is we could prepare this to be sent to a server by doing const people JSON equals json.stringify people. And let's see what that looks like. And so now this turns our array into a string that is JSON. So this is something that you would receive from a server, from an API request of some sort. You could receive a string like this, and then to turn it back into an array and something that you can parse, you could then come in here and we could say json.parse. And so we're going to parse this string that we created, this JSON string, and we're going to console log that. So now we see our array of objects. All right, the next reference type that we'll discuss is functions. So functions perform a task or calculate values or manipulate data, and they are reusable. So you can write a function that can be called many times. So traditionally, we start a function with function, and then we create a name. So we could call this function hello, and then we have, after the name, we have parentheses, and then curly braces. So within here, we could console log hello world. And notice here that we terminate each line with semicolons, as we talked about earlier, but a function does not require semicolons. So the last curly brace does not require a semicolon. And so if I save this, you'll notice in the console that nothing happens. So we're defining the function here, but we have to invoke or call the function at some point in our code in order for it to do anything. So we do that by typing hello, parentheses, and then we can save that, and we'll see now that the function runs. Now we can add parameters to our functions. So within these parentheses, we could add a name parameter, and then instead of world, we could add name here. So it will say hello and then whatever name we've passed it. So when we call the function, we then have to define a name. So this is an argument. So we'll say hello, and then our argument will be John. And if I save that, you'll see it says hello John. And we can have multiple parameters here, first name and last name. We're going to use our backtick notation. It's also called a template literal. So we'll use backticks, and we'll say hello, and then $ curly braces, and then first name, space, $ curly braces, last name. And I can save that. And you'll notice that it says hello John undefined. So in our call, we did not define the second argument. So we need to add that with a comma, and we'll say Smith, and save that, and now it says hello John Smith. So we could create a function then that calculates a percentage. So we will say convert %, and we will be passing in a number. And so to convert a number to a percentage, we will take the number and divide it by 100. When we call the function, we want this percentage number to be returned to us. So at the beginning of this line, we would use return. So now to call that, we would type convert %, and we would pass it a number. So let's pass it 50. And if I save that, we're not going to see anything because it's working in the background, but we haven't console logged it. So let's wrap this in console log. And now save it. So now we see that we've converted the 50% into a decimal. So if we were to pass this a string, it's not expecting a string. So let's pass a string in here and see what happens. And we're going to get NaN. That stands for not a number. So that is basically an error. Okay, so this is an example of a traditional function. And in ES6, there is another way to write functions, and that's called an arrow function. And so to convert this into an arrow function, we would just remove function, turn this into a constant, and then we would say convert % equals, and then we have our parameter, and then we would use equal and greater than sign to create an arrow. And so now let's change John back to a number, and we'll save that, and we see that it works just as it did before. And we can further reduce this since we only have one line that we're calling here, and since we only have one parameter, we can actually remove these parentheses, and since we have only one line, we can remove the curly braces as well, and the return. So we could actually write it like this, very short. I'll save that, and just to show you, I'm going to change the number to 75, and there we go. It works just the same this way. A lot more concise and easier to write. Alright, now let's move on to loops. The first type of loop that we'll talk about is while. So we could type while, and then we could say I is less than 10, console log I. So we haven't defined I, so actually the first thing we'll need to do up here is we'll say let I equal 0. Alright, so we've got I equals 0, and so while I is less than 10, do something. So console log I, and then we need to increment I, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but we can increment things. So if we did I equals I plus 1, that would then increment I. But there is a shorthand for that. We can just do I plus plus. That increments it by 1. And we could do the same thing if we wanted to decrement it. We could say I minus minus. All right, and so let's see what that does when we save it. So this logs I through each loop. So it comes through here once, and initially I is 0, and then we increment it, and it loops through again. This time I is 1, all the way to 9, and then it increments it to 10, but it doesn't loop again. So it doesn't console log 10 because we're saying as long as I is less than 10. So it's stopping at 9. Okay, so now let's move on to something called a for loop. So the structure of a for loop starts with for, and then we'll say let I equal 0. Then we have a semicolon, and we'll do I less than 10, semicolon, and then I plus plus, and then we'll console log I. So this is the same thing that we did in the while loop, except it is much more compact. So within the for, we are setting the variable I to 0, and then we're saying as long as I is less than 10, and then we are iterating or incrementing I each time. So I'll save this, and we'll see the same thing. Let's look at looping through arrays. So that's pretty common to loop through an object or an array. Alright, so we're going to use an array of people like we were using earlier. Similar to what we were using earlier, I'm going to paste that in here. So we have an array of objects. Our first object is our first and last name and age of John Smith, and then the same for Mary Smith. And so let's see how we can loop through this. We could use a for statement, so we could say for let I equal 0, and now we'll say I less than people.length, and then I plus plus, and then we can console log something. So this time we're starting I at 0, and as long as I is less than people.length. So we have this length property that we can call on the array to see how many items are in the array. So as long as I is less than the total length of the array, then do this and increment I. And so what we can do here is we can log people, and then we can use bracket notation and put I in here. And so then this will log each item, which is going to be these objects. So let's just save this and see what that does. I missed a semicolon there. So now it's logging our 2 objects. And then what we can do is if we want to get something specific from each object, we can then use dot notation, and we could just get the first name. So now we get John and Mary. Now there is a shorthand for this. We can actually take all of this out, and we could say let person of people. And now instead of people and a bracket notation with I, we can just log the person, and I'll save that. And now we're back to our 2 objects. And then if we just want the age, then we can just get the ages. So let person of people, so person we're declaring, and we're pulling that from people, so it's looping through people and taking each object as the person. Now there is something called high order array methods, and so these are methods that we can use directly off of the array. So we could, instead of doing a for loop, we could say people dot for each, and then this is a method, so we'll use parentheses, and then here we'll pass a function. Within the function we'll have a property of person, and then here we can console log person. And then remember earlier we said that on functions the last curly brace does not require a semicolon, but people.forEach ends here in this parentheses, and so we do need a semicolon there. Alright, and I'm going to save that, and now we're back to our 2 objects. So this for each is a high order array method that loops through the array. And then we're pulling person out, which is each object, and we could name this whatever we want. We could put X here and then X here, and it'd be the same thing. So then we can do first name, and we just get the first name of each. So we can shorten this as well. Instead of function, we could turn this into an arrow function. And so we could actually just remove function. And because we only have one parameter, we could remove these parentheses. And then we need to put our arrow. Because we only have one line, we could actually remove the curly braces as well. And let's change this to age. And I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller, fit everything on there. So now we're using an arrow function to log each age. So another high order array method that we could use is map. So I'm just going to comment that out, and we'll go down here, and we will this time create a constant, and we will name this person name, and we'll make this equal to people.map, and this is a method. So in here we will again pass person. We can name this whatever we want, but I'm going to say person, and then I'm going to go ahead and make this an arrow function, and I am going to return person.name. I'm going to console log person name. Let's see what that does. I'm not sure why I called it name. Let's do first name, and there we go. John and Mary. So this constant becomes an array of only the names. So if all that we're looking for is the first name, then we can use map to pull those out into a new array. Another method is filter. So we'll create another constant, and this time we'll name this person age under 30. I know that's long, and we're going to make this equal to people.filter, and this is a method. And so again, we'll use an arrow function, and we'll say person, and this time we are going to return person.age that is less than 30, and then let's see what we get from this. So person age under 30, let's log that, and let's see what we got. So we got an array of objects. So we're filtering the objects. We had John and Mary both in our original people array, but we're filtering this array to include only the objects that have an age less than 30. So John is set to 30, so he's not going to be included. So if we have a huge array and we only need certain items from the array, we can filter it out into a new array and then use that. All right, I'm going to clear all of this and we'll move on to the next topic. All right, now we're going to talk about conditionals. So to start, let's create a variable, and we'll say let color, we'll go back to colors, color equal red. Let's talk about if-else statements. So what we can do is evaluate a variable by using if. So if color equals red, then do something. So we can console.log true. And I'll save that, and we get true. So color equals red. Let's actually change this to a number. Let's go back to age. Let's say 30. And so now we could say age. If age equals 30, then true. Let's talk about the equal sign here. So we have two equal signs because we're evaluating age. If we only had one equal sign, that means we're assigning something to it. So we don't want to assign anything, we want to evaluate it. Now watch what happens if I turn this 30 into a string. We still get true. So what this does is it actually converts 30 into a number and then compares it. So it's not truly equal because it's a string. So if we want to know that if it's truly equal, we want to use 3 equal signs. And now we don't get anything. So 2 equal signs does not match the data type. It will try to convert it and then see if it matches. 3 equal signs makes sure that the data types also match. So if I change this back to a number, we will get true again. So what we could also do is we could say if age is greater than 30, or we could say less than 30. We could say less than or equal to. We could say greater than or equal to. There's many different options. We could also say not equal. So exclamation is the not operator. So exclamation and equal, that again is not going to match data types. So if I turn this into a string, it could still work. But exclamation equal would match data type as well. So for the most part, if you want to see if something is equal, you want to use 3 equal signs. Or if you want to see if something is not equal, you'll use exclamation and 2 equal signs. So now, if this is true, we want to run this. But what if it's false? So we could say else. So that means if the statement is true, it will run the first block of code. And if the statement is false, it will run the second. So we'll say console log false. Okay, so let's just change this to 3. And now it's true. Age does not equal 3, so it's running this code. All right, let's take this out, and let's say, what if we want 2 parameters? So we also want to check if age is greater than 18. And let's move the console log up here. So let's say as long as age is less than 35 but greater than 18, then log true. And we would get true because age is 30. Instead of writing it this way, we could actually put it into one if statement instead of nesting it. So we could take this out, and then we could say and. So 2 ampersands together is the and operator. And then we can take this if statement out. So we're saying if the age is less than 30 and age is greater than 18, then console log true. And we'll still get true there. We could also change this to an or. And 2 pipe characters is the or operator. So if the age is less than 30 or greater than 18, then log true. Another thing that we could do is, so we can say if age is greater than 30, then let's console log greater than 30. And then we could say else if, and we could put another if statement. Age is greater than 25. Then we'll console log greater than 25. And then else console log less than 25. All right, so age is 30. So if age is greater than 30, then it's going to log greater than 30, and it's going to stop there. It's not going to continue on. But the age is equal to 30. So it's going to move on to the next one, else if age is greater than 25, then it's going to log greater than 25. If it's not, then it will log this last one less than 25. So let me save that, and we'll see greater than 25, because 30 is greater than 25. If I change this to 31, then it will say greater than 30. And if I change this to 24, and that's going to say less than 25. All right, so let's create some variables here. We'll just say A equals 1 and B equals 2. All right, so I'm just going to create a function here called evaluate. And in here I want to say if A is less than B, return true. Else return false. All right, and so then let's console log the function, and we see true. So we can write this a lot easier than this. So we could actually just say return and delete all of this. So return A is less than B. So it's going to return true or false. And same thing. I could change this to greater than and save it, and it's going to say false. So this right here is basically an if statement that's going to evaluate A and B. All right, let's look at a ternary operator. So it's basically a shorthand if statement. So let's create a variable. We'll say let animal equal cat. And then we're going to create a constant of likes cats. And we're going to say this is equal to animal equals cat question mark true colon false. And then let's console log likes cats, and it's going to say true. So this is the if statement. If animal equals cat, then return true, and then the colon is else, return false. So if we changed cat to dog and save it, we're going to get false. Alright, the last conditional that we're going to talk about is called a switch. So we're going to leave this animal variable in here, and we are going to say switch, and we're going to pass animal in here. So then this is going to evaluate the string. And so what we use here is case. So we'll say case dog, console log dog. We can say case cat, console log cat. And what we have to do on each of these cases is when we're done, we have to break. Then we will need a default case. And then here we can log neither. And then break. I can spell that right. So the way this switch works is it's going to evaluate animal. And animal is dog currently. So it's going to say, in the case that it is a dog, then do this. And then exit or stop the evaluation. If it was not dog, then go on to the next case. And if it's cat, then do this. And then exit the evaluation. And if it's neither of these, then here's the default code that we want to use. And we'll say neither. And then stop the evaluation. If we didn't have break here, then it would go through each one. Alright, so let me save this and let's see what we get. Of course we get dog. And if I change this to cat, we'll get cat. And if I change it to bird, we're going to get neither. If we had to compare this to an if-else, this would be like our if statement, else if, and then default would be else. Now if we wanted to do something if it's multiple parameters, we could get rid of these lines here. We could put these together and we could say dog or cat. And it's neither, so let's change it back to dog and dog or cat. And if I change it to cat, it's still going to run the same one. So it can be either of these. Alright, I'm going to clear this, and now we're going to talk about the DOM, or Document Object Model. So this is how we can interact and manipulate things on the web page. So let me move this console down a bit, and we're going to add some stuff to our body and our HTML. So I'm going to add a UL with li times 3. Alright, now in the UL, we want to add an ID, and we'll just call this list. And then in each li, we're going to add a class of list item. All right, just copy this. All right, and let me add some text here. We'll just say item 1, 2, and item 3. All right, just some basic HTML there. All right, so now what I want to show you is this document object model. It's like a tree structure of the entire document. So we can go to elements here, and within our body, we can see the structure. So we've got body. Within the body, we have our UL. And then within the UL, we have our LIs. And so we can access this structure through JavaScript. The first thing that we're going to discuss is single element selectors. So to do something with one of these objects, we first have to select it. And so what we can do is we'll create a constant and we'll call this list, and that is going to equal document. So we're going to look at the document, and then get element by ID. And that is a method, and we will pass in the ID of the list, and that was list. And so now if we console log list, and let's move over to the console here, we'll see now the list now is in this list constant. Another way that we could use this is by using query selector. Now, query selector is a little bit different. You can select items by a tag, an ID, a class, many different ways. So I could just say UL, because there's only one UL on the page, so I could select it this way, and then if I hit save, it's going to select the first UL on the page. I could also select by ID, and so by ID on query selector, we have to use hashtag or pound and then the name of the ID. So it would be like this. If I hit save, we'll get the same thing. Now if I want to select the list items, let's create another constant, and we'll say list items. And if I do document dot query selector, and then to select a class is you use a dot. So IDs are hashtag and classes are dots, and then we called it list item. All right, and now that's console log list items. Let's see what we get. So we get the first one, but where's the rest of them? So query selector only selects the first element that it finds a match to. So if we wanted to select all of the list items, we would have to use query selector all. And now we get an array of the 3 list items. And query selector all is considered a multiple element selector. So now that we have those items, we can then use that array, and we can say list items dot for each, and we can loop through those list items. So we can say item and create an arrow function here, and then we can do something with the with each item. So let's just console log the item, and it logs those items. Now these have methods and properties as well. So we could say text content to just get the text from each item. All right, so now let's talk about DOM manipulation. We can actually change things in the document object model. Let's say I wanted to remove the first item from the list. So I could use the list, and I could say first element child dot remove. And let's save that. And now list item 1 is gone. If I wanted to remove the last, we could just change this to last. And now item 1 and 2 are there, but 3 is gone. If I wanted to change the text in the first item, I could say first element child dot text content equals new item. All right, now, and that changed it to new item. Along with text content, there is also inner text, and there's inner HTML. I could actually add HTML in here if I wanted. So let's just add a h1 new item Save that. You can also add styles. So let's go to last child element dot style and change the style and background to red. So we can manipulate CSS styles from JavaScript. So this is how we can dynamically change things on the website depending on how the user is interacting with it. All right, I'm going to get rid of all of this. And now the last thing that we're going to talk about is events. Well, let's go back to our HTML and let's just remove all of this, and we're going to add a button. And we will have the ID of my button, and let's just say click me. And now what we can do here is we can add an event listener to the button. So let's create a constant, and we will name this button, and that is going to equal the document dot. Now we can do a query selector, or we can do it by ID, either way. So we'll do get element by ID, and then that was my button. And now we can add an event listener to this button. So we'll do button dot add event listener, and this is a method. So we are going to listen for the click event, and then we are going to have a function. All right, so add event listener, where the event that we're listening for is click, and then we're going to do something. So we can write it like this, or we could use an arrow function. So the arrow function, we can just remove this. There's our arrow function. And then we can, let's just console log the event. So we're adding E stands for event, and you can put whatever you want here, but if you put A, it would work the same. And let's see what happens. So let me save that. Oops, I forgot to put this in parentheses here. There we go. Now if I click it, now we see the event. We have all of these properties within the event. And so now here we see the event type was a click. And now when we click that button, we can tell it to do something. Other event listeners are mouse over. So let me save that. And now if we mouse over this, the event triggers without me clicking. I just move the mouse over. So what we could do here is when we mouse over, let's change the color of the button. So we'll do button dot style dot background equals blue. Let's get rid of that console log. All right, now if I hover over it, it changes to blue. We can also do, instead of mouse over, we could do mouse out. And now I can hover over it and nothing happens. But as soon as I leave it, it turns to blue. All right, now let's look at a practical example. So I've got this to-do list created. Let's review quickly the HTML portion of it. So I have a custom style sheet for the CSS, which we're not going to review the CSS in this video. In the body, we have a wrapper, a header, and then our first section here is add task. And within here, we have our input, which is our new task input, and our button, the add task button. So that's right over here, add a task and the button. And then below that, we have a header with an H2 of task, and then a button within that. That is the remove complete button. That's this one right over here. And then the next section is the task list wrapper, and then the task list, which is a UL, and it's blank right now. So that is right here in this white section at the bottom. Nothing in there currently. And lastly, we have a template. We have an ID on this template of task template, and within the template is our list item. So we'll be using this template to add into our UL in JavaScript. So within the template, we have an LI with a class of task, an input that is a checkbox, and then a label, and within the label we have a check mark. This is the custom code to represent a check mark, and then below that we have a custom checkbox. Again, this is all custom CSS, which we're not going to cover. After that, we have our main.js script. Let's go into the JavaScript file now. So I have everything collapsed right now. It all fits on one page. It's 44 lines altogether. Not a whole lot of JavaScript. So let's start at the top here. We have our first constant, which is new task, and that is our new task input. So we're selecting the input. Our next one is the add task button. So that's the plus button next to the input. The next one is the remove complete button. So we're selecting that clear complete button. And then our task list, which is the blank area here. And then our task template. And then lastly, we have an ID variable. We're going to start it with 1, and we're going to iterate through and assign an ID to each task. Okay, so this is all of our setup with our constants and our variables. Next, we're actually going to do things. So we're going to take the new task, which is the input. We're going to add an event listener to it, and we're looking for the key up event. Let me expand that. And so we're using an arrow function, and we're passing the event. And then we're going to say if event.keycode is equal to 13, and 13 is the key code for the enter key. So we're looking for the press of the enter button. So if the key code equals 13 and the input is valid, so we're running some basic input validation, and I'll show you that in a second. If those are both true, then we're going to add the task. And let's go on to the next one here is the add task button, adding an event listener to the plus button over here. We're listening for a click. We're not passing the event because we don't care about any of the event parameters. We just want to know if it was clicked. So then again, if the input is valid, then we're going to add task. So what we're looking at here is if we've entered text and then we press the enter key, we're going to call the add task function. Or if we entered text and we press the add button, then we're going to call the add task function as well. All right, let's look at this input validation next. So we have a function here at the bottom, input valid, and this is very basic input validation. We're simply just looking to see if the task input value is not equal to empty. So as long as we've put something in this input, we're going to return true. If the input is blank, we're going to return false. So if the input is blank, nothing is going to happen. All right, and so let's now look at the add task function. So within the add task function, we are setting up a constant of task element, and that is going to be the task template. So we use document.import node to get the task template, and we want the content of the template. Now the next variable in import node is set to true. So let me go back to the HTML and show you. Task template content is this part. If the next parameter were set to false, then it would only pull in the top level element, the li. It wouldn't pull in any of the content of the li. So when we say true, we're telling it to pull in the entire content, everything, every level after the first level, all the way down. So this first constant, we are setting up a new task element. Now the next constant, we are selecting the checkbox from this task element that we just created. So task element.querySelector input. And then we're going to set that checkbox ID to the current ID. And initially, the ID is 1. All right, so we're setting the ID of the checkbox to 1. And the next constant is our label. We're selecting the label from our task element that we created. And we're setting the labels for the HTML4 attribute to ID. So we're telling the label it is for this checkbox. So let's go back to the HTML there. So we have our input. So the JavaScript is adding an ID to this input, and it's adding a for property to the label so that it knows it's for this input. All right, so we've got all of that set up. And then next we're going to take the label and we're going to append the new task.value. So that is the value of the input. Whatever we've typed in there, it's going to append it to the label. So go back to the HTML here. So here's the label, and append means put at the end. So it's basically going to, after this last span here, put the text in this area here. Alright, then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our task list, which was this empty UL, and we're going to append child, and we're going to put our task element that we created. All of this is basically a copy of our template in the HTML, and we've made some modifications to everything, and then we're going to append it, so add it onto the task list UL. Next step, we're going to take the task input and we're going to set the value to empty. So we've already done everything that we need to do with whatever was typed into there, and now we want to clear it and reset it so that another task can be typed in. And lastly, we're going to increment the ID so that the next task will have a unique ID. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Let's go ahead and type something in here. I'll just say task 1, and I hit enter, and so that created a task here. And I can do that again. I'll say task 2, and I can press the plus button, and that'll do the same thing. So it clears the input and it puts the task down here. Now these are custom checkboxes. If I check one off, then it kind of grays out a little bit and has that check mark. And so the last thing for us to look at is this clear complete button. So let me expand that. So we can see we're adding an event listener here, looking for a click, and we have a constant. We're going to set up tasks equals query selector all elements with a class of task. So we know that all of our list items had a class of task. All right, and so that creates an array of all of our tasks. And now we're going to loop through that array and we're going to pull out each task. Then we have an arrow function, and in the function we're going to create a checked constant. So we want to know, is that task checked? So within that task, which is the li, we're going to use query selector to find the input, which is the checkbox, and we're going to see if that input is checked. And so that provides us with a true or false. So if it is checked, this would be true, and then we're going to call task.remove. So we're going to remove the li from the DOM. All right, so I've checked that one off, and I'm going to hit clear complete, and now it's gone. I can check that one off, clear it as well. Alright, so that's all we're going to cover in this video. We barely scratched the surface. There's so much more that we could talk about. There's so many more advanced topics, advanced arrays, objects, advanced math, error handling, ES5 object-oriented programming, ES6 classes. So I'll definitely have some more advanced videos on the way soon. Let me know in the comments below which topics you'd like me to cover first. And if this video helped you in any way, a like is appreciated. Subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications of new videos. And thanks for watching.